let's start. Today's lecture is going to be about argument construction, so why your side's good, as well as rebuttal, so why the other side's arguments aren't as strong. And uh, the overall format, I'll just be going over the arguments, then the rebuttal. We can do a quick Q&A, and then, like yesterday, we'll go into a practice debate. Okay, on the argument side, every argument that you give should have these 4 bits. First of all, there should be a claim. What this is just the overall headline of your argument, what you're trying to prove, what you're trying to achieve. Uh, this is kind of the whole goal of your argument. So, um, in the case of yesterday's debate, where we talked about working at home or working in person, your headline for an argument could be, oh, working from home is more environmentally friendly. Okay, that would be your claim. So it's kind of just the bullet point headline. Next is your proof and analysis. This is explaining why your claim is true. So you'll have to give a few reasons as to why working from home is environmentally friendly, right? So maybe something like, oh, you don't use cars, so there's less pollution from transportation. That could be one of your pieces of analysis. Third is an example or an illustration. I'll go more into this later. And then fourth is an impact. And in the case of the example, this would look like if we help the environment, then that might slow down like sea levels rising. And so maybe cities and towns which are near the coast won't like be underwater in 50 years. Something like that. That could be an impact. So an impact is the consequence of your claim. The way you can think about this is basically your proof analysis and illustration comes before your claim, and it helps to prove the claim itself. Then the claim is what you're trying to prove. And finally, the impact comes after your claim and shows the tangible benefits that come after you've proven your point. Okay, let's get a bit more into each one. Firstly, the claim. So, as I said, it's the title, it summarizes your argument. And if you remember from yesterday, at the start of your speech, you should be giving a bit of an introduction, right? Like a table of contents of what your speech includes. In that table of contents, you should be saying the claim for each of your arguments. So at the start of your speech, you should be saying, okay, I'll be proving 2 things in my speech. Firstly, why working from home is like less detrimental for the environment. And secondly, why working from home allows you to have more family time and is better for your mental health. So those would be kind of the 2 claims that you put at the start of your speech as your table of contents. And then you go into the speech itself and go into each of your arguments. Okay. Secondly is the proof or analysis. So the claim's quite straightforward, but the proof and analysis is where you should be spending most of your time. And this is explaining why claims are true. So keep in mind that this is the most important bit. A lot of people can just say claims and like hopefully they're like claims that are going to help their side, but unless you can actually systematically prove why your claims are true, then they don't really mean anything. And that's a very common issue, which is called just asserting your side. An assertion is basically just an unproved or unsupported claim, and those are never really going to help you. On the side of proofs and analysis, the more reasons you give, the stronger your claim is going to be. So you always want to be giving multiple pieces of analysis. Any questions? Yeah. Ayush?
Yes, sir. I had some connectivity issues. If if the proof is quite obvious or the claim is quite obvious, like if we implement a sugar tax, companies will use less sugar in their products. That's a pretty obvious statement. So can we skip stating the proof for that?
No. And especially, so first of all, even if it's quite obvious, you should be giving every step of the proof. But secondly, the example you just gave about companies reducing the amount of sugar in their products is definitely not at all what I would consider an obvious claim. Um, at least when I discussed the topic with like some people before, I don't think that was something that was like the first thing that came to people's minds. So it's definitely not obvious in that sense. But also, like, no matter if you think something's obvious, it might not be obvious to other people. So you definitely should go over every step. Uh,
Got it, sir. And on a point,
mhm.
second point, are we allowed to use like online statistics? Like, can we do Google statistics during our 15-minute prep time and use those statistics to back our proof? Because
So
in
no,
our
you're not
last
allowed to search up
debate,
anything.
one of the judges came to our breakout room and told that we are not allowed.
Yeah, so you're not allowed to search anything
They
up.
told
You're
us
not
we are
allowed to
not
use
allowed.
any statistics. You should be doing everything based on what you already know. No searching up. Does that make
Uh,
sense?
got it. Thank you, sir.
Cool.
Yes, sir.
I'll keep going. So that's more or less everything on the analysis side. You just have to make sure every claim you make is well supported with two or three pieces of evidence or like reasons to back it up. Now moving on to examples and illustrations. This is what you should be using to ground your claims in reality. So it could be real world evidence, but not stuff you search up, stuff you already know, just like general knowledge. Or instead of using that kind of like real example, you could also give a hypothetical example. Um, what this might look like in the case of the sugar tax is just going through the thought process of a potential customer. So saying, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's tired, who's just come back from school and goes to the nearest convenience store and he really wants to get a sweet, but he doesn't look at the price because it's just habitual. He always takes a bar of chocolate. And so he takes it, he buys it, and regardless of whether the price increases by 10 cents, he chooses to buy it anyway. So that might be a walk-through illustration of why an increase in price might not actually lead to a decrease in consumption. And a key thing to note is that examples and illustrations are not enough just by themselves. So, for example, you cannot just say 100 years ago, um, this country implemented a sugar tax and it didn't work and obesity rates didn't decrease. Yes, that is real world evidence to support your argument, but it doesn't actually tell me why it didn't work. Maybe there were like very different circumstances in that country. Maybe that was an exception. So unless you actually explain to me there are three reasons why a sugar tax will not work, no matter the scenario, then it's hard for me. If you don't do that, then it's hard for me to believe your argument. So what you should be doing is giving those 2 to 3 reasons, and then near the end, you should also give this example so that it really solidifies the fact that your claim and your reasons are grounded in reality and that they actually make sense. But examples aren't enough by themselves. Uh, Great. Finally, the last bit of a argument is the impact. And this is quite important. In yesterday's debates, and I think the day before as well, when we were just discussing things informally, impacting is something that was missed out. Um, And the goal of an impact is to show why is your argument important. Yes, maybe the environment is not as badly damaged if you work from home, but why is it important? It's important because, oh, there are a lot of people who are affected by like global warming and rising sea levels are destroying towns and cities. So what you should be trying to get your argument to using these impacts is tangible harms or benefits to people. So things like lives being lost or other such harms. In the case of the sugar tax, two impacts that you could have are that if people eat um, less sugary products, which would probably be your claim, then that leads to less obesity and less heart disease, right? And that's a tangible benefit. That's probably going to lead to longer lifespans and fewer people dying. A secondary impact could also be if people have less obesity and less heart disease and better health overall, then there's going to be less stress on the healthcare system. So, especially in the case of, let's say, the UK, where you have free healthcare and the NHS takes care of everyone, the more people that are unhealthy and have heart disease or obesity, the more work it is for the NHS. And so they're going to be overburdened where they can't treat everyone. In other words, the NHS is probably going to be expending resources on people who are obese rather than helping those who might have more serious illnesses, just because they're limited resources, they're limited hospital beds, things along those lines. So once again, that could also lead to more lives being saved if these hospital beds get freed up. Does that make sense? So just to summarize, these are the four bits, and every argument you give should have all of them. Maybe an example isn't always necessary, but you should always have a claim analysis and then an impact. Any questions? Yes, Ayush?
So, an example of this would be claim implementing a sugar tax would make people healthier. Proof this is because people would buy less sugary foods and have a better diet. Example, if you go to the store and see that the price of sugary food is now 10% higher, you might reconsider buying it. Therefore, people will have less sugary foods. Impact. Because of this, the reduction in consumption of sugars will lead to a reduction in obesity, thus reducing strain on our national healthcare. That's one example.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. So honestly, if you are able to get all four bits in today, just like that, I'd be really impressed. The other thing you can do, of course, is kind of just hammer down on the analysis specifically, because one piece of analysis is good, but oftentimes it's not enough. You want to have your claim standing on multiple pillars. So this is where you could also add in something like, oh, on the one hand, consumers would buy less sugary products because it's more expensive. On the other hand, companies themselves will likely decrease the amount of sugar in their products because it's now more expensive, right? So they'll buy they'll buy less and they'll have to distribute that like equally. So they might just put less sugar in their products. Or thirdly, they might shift away from sugary products altogether and go for healthier alternatives that maybe simulate the taste but have no sugar at all, right? So there are many different ways, and all of them lead to the claim of people being healthier because they are consuming less sugar. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Great. Any other questions before we go into the rebuttal? Okay. So now for the rebuttal side of things, you can see the overview is actually very similar because each thing which you do in the claim, or sorry, in the argument should be and can be rebutted. So the analysis can be attacked, the illustrations can be flipped, and the impacts can be mitigated. So let's go into how you can attack each bit of an argument separately. Attacking analysis. So we've discussed how there's this kind of systematic chain of logic that goes from your starting point to your final claim. And there are going to be multiple links in between. Uh, so in the case of the example I gave about companies maybe decreasing the amount of sugar in their products, the chain of logic would be something along the lines of, okay, so sugar is more expensive now, and if companies buy the same amount of sugar, then it's going to cost them more, which is going to decrease their profits. Since they don't want to decrease their profits, what they're going to do is find an alternative to decrease the amount of sugar in their products, which in turn means that consumers are eating less sugar, even if they eat the same like chocolate bar, right? So maybe there are a few links in there. I had it on this slide here. Those are basically the different, like, 3, 4, 5 links that go into that argument. And so what you should be doing when rebutting that argument is looking for 3 things. Firstly, an unproven assertion. So what this would look like is you look at your 4 different like kind of logical steps in that chain of logic and see, is there something just like unproven or just wrong? Most likely the first step could be the one which is like starting from an unproven base. And if you can point out that the first step doesn't work, then the rest of the chain of logic falls apart. Secondly, you should be looking for missing links. So maybe the opposition has given you these 4 different things that link together, but actually they've just kind of, hidden the fact that some of these things aren't actual causal relationships. They don't link to each other. And so you can point out, oh, yes, the like initial step makes sense, but somewhere along the line it breaks apart, and like going from step 2 to step 3 doesn't work. So those are like the main ways you can try attacking analysis. And attacking analysis is generally about proving that the other side is like strictly incorrect. So there are lots of ways to do rebuttal. One of them is disproving the other side, which attacking analysis focuses on. Another way might be to say that, oh, the other side is correct, but not important to the debate, something along those lines. Or it could be the other side is correct, but our side is even more important and helps the same people even more. So there are various things you can do. Yes, Ayush?
Uh, could you repeat what is comparative there?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go into that.
Comparative.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Comparative is kind of what I mentioned about like explaining your side and their side. When looking at their analysis, it could be that the analysis is true, and so you can't say that there's anything unproven or that there are missing links. It is in fact true. But what you can say is, oh, look at our analysis. Our analysis is stronger. Our analysis makes more sense. Things along those lines. So just saying, yes, maybe you're right as well, but it's not very well proven, or it's not as strong a piece of analysis as our side. So if you can't actually disprove them. Okay, next is attacking examples. And this could be, the best way to do this is to flip an example that the opposition has given. So they've probably given a statistic or a past a historical fact, or they've given you like a bit of a story explaining how a customer acts. So in the case of a statistic, maybe they've said something like, oh, Brazil in 1960s implemented a sugar tax, and that led to obesity rates decreasing by 30%. And of course, that doesn't prove anything, but it is an example that could work. If you maybe know something about Brazil during that time, there's a bit of a specific example, but regardless, then maybe you could bring out some new piece of information about that same example and say, oh, wait, the reason why obesity decreased during that time was because there was a famine, and so people were literally starving, something along those lines. And then it would be like, oh, wait, like that example doesn't work for their side at all. It clearly wasn't the sugar tax. But yeah, so that's one way in which you could maybe flip an illustration or example. But honestly, this isn't like the most important bit. Attacking the analysis and then now attacking the impacts, that's really what you should be focusing on. Examples are just like a bit of an add-on. Okay, finally, for attacking impacts, there are three very important things here, and they're all different. So you do need to focus. And so the first bit is relevancy. So let's say you're maybe working from home or something, but turns out that only like IT or like technology workers are effectively working from home, and that factory workers still need to go in for their job. Like that's not exactly what the motion was yesterday, but like on a similar topic, if that was the case, and you're just explaining how tech workers benefit from working from home, what the opposition can attack is the fact that, oh, do we really care about tech workers that much? Maybe factory workers who are making a lot less money, who have worse working conditions, we should care more about them because of how they are more vulnerable and how like they're the ones who have to worry about putting food on the table day after day. Tech workers, they're doing fine already. They're probably going to be more well off compared to factory workers who we should be more worried about. So that might be attacking the relevancy of their argument. A similar thing would be if their argument focuses on helping the rich while you help the poor. That's another way in which you could show why your arguments are more relevant or theirs aren't. So that's one way. Secondly is mitigation. What this means is saying, yes, they're right, but they're not as right as you might think. So instead of um, the environment being helped in like 5 different ways, you can say that 3 of them don't work, and so it's only being helped in 2 ways. And that would just be decreasing the scale of their impact and saying, yes, but not a lot, that kind of thing. And thirdly is weighing. And this is what I hinted at before. It's about like very directly comparing to your side and your arguments. So it could be saying, oh, the opposition, they help 100 people while we help 10,000. That could be one way to compare your 2 arguments. While another way might be to say, oh, their argument like saves or like cures a disease for 10 people, while our argument saves the lives of 10 people. So saving a life is more important, and that's why it would be a stronger argument. Abir, do you have a question?
Can you explain mitigation once more?
Yeah.
I didn't understand it quite good.
Sure. So mitigation is very important. It's probably the most common way of attacking an impact. Mitigation is just basically you're not able to disprove their argument fully, so you're only weakening it. In the case of, let's say, the sugar tax example, maybe they've given like a lot of strong arguments as to why it will decrease obesity. But to mitigate, maybe you can say, yes, it decreases obesity, but only in like 10% of countries, because in the rest of them, the arguments that they said don't really work. So something like that could mitigate their argument. Does that make sense?
Yeah, now I understood it.
Yeah, and that's about it, honestly. I just have one last slide, which is just overall tips. Um, Tips wise, when you're doing rebuttal, the best way to kind of like structure it is uh, to restate the argument you're trying to rebut, so it's very clear what you're trying to do. What this means is just like give a 1 second bullet point saying opposition said this, and in that like one sentence, you'd probably restate their headline claim, right? The claim of their argument. And then you can go into your rebuttal because it just makes it clearer what you're actually responding to. In your notes, you probably like know what you're responding to, but out of context, it can be a bit confusing for other people. The other thing is to do an even if, which is just saying, trying to like hedge your bets. So say, even if you don't believe this, that like something I've just said, I also have this other argument to attack their side. Or you could say something like, uh, honestly, opposition's argument doesn't make a lot of sense, and the most reasonable way to interpret it is in this specific way. But even if we take them at their best and interpret it in the way that they're trying to claim, we still win because of XYZ reasons. So basically, it's doing like cases of like a realistic case versus the opposition's best case scenario, just so that you're attacking their argument in like every way possible. And last but not least, you should be explaining the importance of your rebuttal as like a big picture thing. So a lot of the time you can get kind of stuck into the debate and just like you hear a sentence and you're like, okay, that's wrong. I should rebut that. And you like kind of say your rebuttal. But what you need to understand is what's most important is rebutting the biggest arguments. And after you do that, you should be pointing out that you've just rebutted their strongest argument and how that like completely destroys their like side of the motion. Something along those lines. Uh, Great. Does that make sense?